We interrupt the program now in progress to bring you a special report from Guam.
This is Staff Sergeant Alvin Josephi Jr., a United States Marine Corps combat correspondent speaking from Iwo Jima. An attack is underway, and so far this morning, in a couple of hours, they have gone approximately 500 yards through the most difficult kind of terrain. This island is studded with pillboxes, and they have already passed through several lanes of them and have passed over the volcanic ash, the terrible yellow, craggy, rocky, lifeless soil of this part of the island. Whoops, some bullets are whistling past us. We are in the open. Japanese mortars and also small arm fire are occasionally dropping around us.
Ed's war experience were the scar on his back and some Navy gear. The scar was somewhat indented and the shape of a large spoon. The gear was easily accessible in the attic and consisted of a hat, coat, and spats. A Purple Heart, a couple of lapel ribbons, and a participation medal were in his sock drawer. Attached to his key ring was a miniature license plate that said Disabled Veteran. The following comments were brief answers to our periodic questions. Comments that seemed appropriate for our questions at the time begged for more information as I got older. What about the wound, the illegal bullet, and the disabled veteran's plate? What was so horrible about Iwo Jima, and why the fear and the flashbacks? What were the duties of the Navy Corpsman? With 80,000 men, American and Japanese, on the island, how did Cretny ever find you? And finally, what was the significance of the medals and the ribbons? A couple of years ago, I salvaged an old book that my mom had rescued from an old school library. Dated 1917, entitled Lest We Forget, it suggested that the American public was losing sight for the reasons for World War I and why we fight. 50 years later, as we navigated the complexity of the 60s and the 70s, did we sense a frustration of the World War II veteran and a newer version of Lest We Forget? But how could we forget what we did not know? Sure, we had those somewhat vague comments and the other memorabilia, but details were limited. Although a proud veteran, as demonstrated each Veterans Day, he did not freely share his experience. One's spouse or parents provided a sympathetic ear. But what about the more horrifying experiences? Maybe that is why the local VFW club was a popular and probably a much-needed retreat where feeling and thoughts could be shared with other vets. From my personal recollections and the addition of a couple of newspaper articles, recently found letters home, and his complete military file, the minutes that felt like days, and there were 18 days full of these minutes, were slowly put together, all after his death in 1974. Research has filled in the gaps. Now we can complete the story of a hero in our house.
Through the water up to a distance of about 2,000 yards from the shore. There's all hell to pay directly ahead of us. The beach looks as though it's practically on fire.
These 8 square miles of volcanic rock are situated halfway between the Japanese mainland and the U.S. bases on the Mariana Islands. From the Marianas airfields, a bombing campaign is launched against the war machine of Japan. But on this 15-hour round trip, American B-29 Superfortress bombers suffer heavy losses. Damaged aircraft are forced to ditch in the hostile Pacific, a death sentence for the crew. If Iwo Jima's 2 Japanese airfields are captured, there would be a base for bombers to make emergency landings and for fighter planes to escort them to their targets. The island must be taken. In the months before the invasion, aerial reconnaissance experts have examined thousands of photographs of this island. For the first time, these original high-resolution images have been layered over a 3-dimensional contour map, creating a unique perspective on the battle unfolding below.
First thought was, how in the world can we go through this sand? You'd step and go up this ramp, and you'd go up one step and you go back down a half a step, and that's what kind of an island is this?
We talk about sand, but they weren't. They were volcanic crystals, and they didn't adhere to each other. They didn't compact or anything like that. And it was like digging in a wheat bin, you know? You dug in it, it would just fill back up.
It was like walking on BBs, and trying to run in it was impossible.
This ugly, smelly, dirty little island was called Iwo Jima, which means Sulphur Island, and accounted for the smell. Once off the beaches, it was a collection of volcanic ash and a terrible, yellow, craggy, rocky, lifeless soil. It was a jungle of ash, coral, and stone. Only 2.5 miles wide and 4 miles long, its small size was about twice the square miles of Dodge. Maybe that's how Cretny was able to find Dad. Anchoring one end was a well-fortified Mount Suribachi. The rest of the island was inundated with coastal defense guns, sniper holes, machine gun nests, mortar emplacements, and pillboxes. This was not any island. This was Japanese soil. And on this perfect killing field, the invading Marines would soon face a fanatical enemy, warrior against warrior, in a fight to the death, with over half either killed or wounded.
Commanding the island's defense is one of the Japanese High Command's toughest officers, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurabayashi. In June 1944, he is sent to Iwo with a mission to save the island or die fighting. In the next 3 months, he moves in guns, tanks, and troops, doubles the size of his fighting force, and does his best to render the island impregnable. Men arrive at the rate of 500 a day. By October, 21,000 troops are on the island. The Japanese laborers work under horrendous conditions in sweltering heat to fortify Iwo Jima. Kurabayashi has decided on the best mode of defense for Iwo Jima. There will be none of the typically Japanese bonsai charges, no suicide counterattacks at the beachheads. The commander has ordered his troops to mount a static defense with everybody dug in. He divides the island into separate defensive sectors, then rings each one with guns, mortars, landmines, and bunkers 5 feet thick. Underground, the island is a honeycomb of rock and cement. 5 levels of tunnels, most of them 30 feet below ground, connect the entire complex. When the attack comes, any advance will be made over dead Japanese bodies.
And our entire strength to defense of this island. We shall grasp bomb, charge the enemy tank, and destroy them. We shall infiltrate into the midst of the enemy, annihilate them. With every salvo, we will without fail kill the enemy. Each man, 我々はゲリラ戦で敵を苦しめるのだ。
My biggest concern was that I'd run out of luck, run out of chances. How many days can you stay there and not get killed?
You just have to take it as it comes. And if you're strong enough to stand it, you can stand it. If you're not strong enough, you're gonna crack.
If you didn't get wounded, you were gonna die. That's just about the size of it. There was no getting off the island without getting hit somewhere.
You could smell the cordite, the gunpowder, very readily, and there were sights of, there were sights that you would see, but you would not want to share them with anybody.
On the beach, yes, I see a Marine running. Yeah, there's one boy been hit. One boy's been hurt now. Another boy's just been hurt. Another boy's been hit. But, well, they stick a guy in the field. Oh, there's one Marine lying on his back. Now we're at the beach. There's one Marine lying on his back with blood pouring out of him into the water. And here go the corpsmen are walking around. They don't seem to be taking any cover. They're walking upright, looking for casualties, moving from one guy to the next.
On the battlefield, I was saved by an angel. I never knew his name, nor was I able to thank him for the life he gave me. Iwo Jima survivor.
I solemnly pledge myself before God and these witnesses to practice faithfully all of my duties as a member of the Hospital Corps. I hold the care of the sick and injured to be a privilege and a sacred trust, and will assist the medical department officer with loyalty and honesty. I will not knowingly permit harm to come to any patient. I will not partake of nor administer any unauthorized medication. I will hold all personal matters pertaining to the private lives of patients in strict confidence. I dedicate my heart, mind, and strength to the work before me. I shall do all within my power to show in myself an example of all that is honorable and good throughout my naval career.
Whenever a United States Marine or sailor has been badly wounded on America's battlefields, his chances of getting to a doctor in time to save his life have been close to nothing. But his chances of staying alive have been superb because of the bloody sacrifices of America's most consistently unsung heroes, the Navy Hospital Corpsmen. They are not doctors. Their training is measured in weeks instead of years. But it has been their job to be at the center of battle, lightly armed and carrying no more medical supplies than can be dragged in a shoulder bag. They save lives wholesale. And in performing their duty, they have died willingly in shocking numbers.
Although technically Navy personnel, corpsmen were assigned to Marine companies, and for all intents and purposes, they were Marines.
Marines frankly love their corpsmen. I don't think they use those words, but they truly value the service that their corpsmen render to their company, their platoon, their battalion. They're a special breed.
You know what your duty is. You know what's expected of you. You're not going to let your buddies down. You're not going to let your Marines down. You're part of a team.
We landed at Guadalcanal on the 7th of August, 1942, trying to be compliant with the Articles of War, the laws of war. Our corpsmen dutifully wore their brassards and their markers on their helmets, and they carried only light sidearms to protect their patients. The Japanese quickly disabused them of this tendency. Right from the start, they would target the corpsmen, I think realizing how valuable they were to the Marines. Kill the corpsman, kill the morale of that unit. It didn't take long for the corpsmen to remove these markers and try to be as undistinguishable from the other infantrymen as they possibly could.
Corpsmen for the special hell that was Iwo Jima, where they would suffer over 800 killed and wounded.
Iwo Jima was the biggest and bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. It was more than 5 weeks of unremitting frontal assault. There were no sanctuaries. There were no R&R areas. You might take a rifle company out of the front lines and put them in reserve for a couple of days, but the corpsmen in particular had no rest.
You had to do the most traumatic things were the traumatic amputations and the spilled out abdominal cavities. These are the things that were mind-boggling. You're up to your elbows in blood. Your mindset was only on what you were supposed to be doing, but you were numb with fear just as much as anybody else.
There was always a shortage of corpsmen, and had these corpsmen not been as well trained as they were, and dedicated as they were, and unselfish as they were, we would have never made it.
Keep going like an automatic robot. You just continue doing what you've done automatically, rather than trying to stop and analyze each thing. You just take a look and you see it, and your brain just tells you what to do. You're in such a mental trance that you just have no idea what you're doing half the time. Your hands sort of never fail to do the right thing that you were taught to do back in hospital corps school, how to take care of wounded men.
Bitter and bloody fighting continued. The only solace the Marines found on Iwo came from knowing that a corpsman was always close by.
The amazing thing about a corpsman is that they respond to every cry and everybody that's in need.
I don't care how heavy the fire was and how much it was out in the open. If someone hollered corpsman, a corpsman came running.
When you've got to go out where somebody's been wounded and take care of them, you're putting yourself right into the same spot they were. So the chances you're not getting hit are almost unbelievable. But that's what these guys do constantly. They're very courageous.
The life of a corpsman is very, very fragile.
It still rattles around in my mind where a guy would get hit and he would yell, "Corpsman," just a begging kind of a plea. It wasn't a command, you know, like, "Corpsman, come here," or that type thing. It would be a plea, "Come." And he'd show up.
Marines reported that English-speaking Japanese soldiers would shout "corpsman" in hopes of luring the medics into an ambush. Some frontline Marines foiled the Japanese trick by shouting a code name instead of corpsman.
Tallulah Bankhead, I guess, was a famous Broadway singer, actress at that particular time. So they used her name to call for a corpsman because the Japanese couldn't pronounce the L's very well, apparently. And I called for the corpsman. Tallulah, he came over there to where this guy is. And I said, "Jesus, look." And he's looking at him, and he starts crying. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I can't fix anybody else. I can't look at any more blood." He said, "I'm through with this. I'm never going to do this again." He said, and I tried to comfort him, and he was crying, sobbing. And somebody hollered out, "Tallulah." And he hears it. He jumps up and grabs his bag and runs to the next thing.
It wasn't but a minute or two until I heard the corpsman saying, "Oh, Jesus, help me." He was attending a wounded Marine whose part of his skull had been blown away. And I said, "Roy, I'm not Jesus, but I'll help you." We bandaged his head. There wasn't really much to do, and he'd given him a shot of morphine. The man was dying, and we knew it. And just a few minutes, he expired with his last gasp.
I will carry you when you
Our final chapter begins on the USS Leedstown as it makes progress towards the rendezvous point off Iwo Jima. 3 officers, which included 2nd Lieutenant Raymond Ickes, were discussing their possible role in the battle. One lamented that it would be a shame to come all this far and not be called upon. I will be embarrassed and unable to face my friends if we do not land. The second contended that losses will be heavy, and brother, if we do have to land, there will not be enough friends for you to face. 2nd Lieutenant Ickes did not share his thoughts. And on another part of the ship, Corpsman Fritz Bilkey went about his duties. All 4 would become casualties of Iwo Jima. February 19th, the U.S. Leedstown reached its station to find the ocean filled with landing craft. Members of the 3rd Marine Division lined the railings to glimpse any sight of the battle. As the landing craft were returning to their troop ships some distance away, one Marine yelled, "What is that in the bottom?" Another responded, "It is the wounded." And a third stated, "That can't be. There are so many." And so it went, hour after hour, with fighting Marines headed to the beaches and what seemed like just as many wounded coming back. With the staggering losses, the call eventually had to come for the 3rd Marine Division, and it did on February 24th, D-Day +4.
Now we're streaking in to the line of departure. That means we are going to the line from which we will shortly leave. You can hear our motor, the engine of this tank lighter, roaring as we move quickly through the water up to a distance of about 2,000 yards from the shore. Look at the beach. We can see the beach very clearly now. I'll tell you one thing, I'm thinking right now of my home, of my wife and my little daughter, and I hope they're all right. And I hope I come back to them all right. That's about what you think of now. I tried to get some of these men to talk, but I know deep down that's what they're thinking of. All their big Jap stuff dropping in the water up ahead of us a little. We'll probably have to go through it. There's great clouds of black smoke. What was that?
One veteran recalled years later.
When we landed on the beach, it was just absolute chaos. I thought I had seen quite a bit in Guam, but this came as a shock. They hadn't yet started to bury any of the bodies. They were bloated, there were maggots, there were parts of bodies, there were people, Marines that had no head, missing legs. There's a couple smells that you don't get over, and that's the smell of fresh blood coming out of somebody. That odor of sweet blood stays with you. And the other odor is that of a decaying body.
This is Staff Sergeant Alvin Josephi, Jr. We are on one of the runways of Motoyama Airfield number 1. And all around us is a scene of desolation and death. It is a dreadful sight, and one which would sober any person seeing it for the first time.
Uncommon valor is the backbone of the military award system. But when speaking about the Marines on Iwo Jima, Admiral Chester A. Nimitz stated that uncommon valor was a common virtue, and the quote itself is inscribed on the United States Marine Corps War Memorial. 5 documents have provided information about the uncommon valor exhibited by the 3rd Battalion. Before we discuss individual courage, what do we do when the uncommon valor is common? The country doesn't or could not award hundreds or even thousands of medals, so they present unit citations, which recognize the unit's collective extraordinary heroism. The 3rd Battalion received 2. The Navy Unit Commendation, which is comparable to the Silver Star, the nation's 2nd highest military award, and a Presidential Unit Citation, comparable to the Navy Cross, the nation's highest award. Without reading the entire citations, They do use such terms as extraordinary heroism, resistance of increased fury, driven back with terrific losses, hand-to-hand combat, battle fatigue and shock, and against fanatical resistance. And again, Corpsman Bilkey was there. The 3rd Battalion went into action on February 25th with Company Commander William C. Evers, Platoon Leader 2nd Lieutenant Raymond Ickes, and Corpsman Fritz Bilkey.
Their assignment was to advance up the middle of the island, which provided little cover and an opportunity for maximum Japanese resistance. As the battle started, an officer quickly reported, "The gates of hell have opened on all sides."
The intensity of the battlefield experience is reflected in their award citations. Captain Evers and 2nd Lieutenant Ickes, Silver Star citations, credit both with rallying their pinned down and/or retreating units against tremendous opposition. Additionally, there is a mention of intense automatic small arms and mortar fire, murderous barrages, hostile fire, and heavy casualties. During those initial retreats, we can assume that Corpsman Bilkey remained on the field to aid the numerous wounded, because that is what we have learned Corpsman did. It should be noted here that of the 22 officers that landed with the 3rd Battalion, all were either killed or wounded by the end of the conflict, with Captain Evers dying of his wounds on February 25th and 2nd Lieutenant Ickes becoming severely wounded on March 7th, and Corpsman Bilkey was there, as related in an interview with the Dodgeville Chronicle. He also mentions that of the 32 corpsmen in his unit, only 6 were left by March 14th, with 2 of his buddies killed and 1 severely wounded. Only God knows why I'm still here. 12,000 miles away, news of the 3rd Battalion's actions were a stark reminder that no American was immune from the costs of the war. As 2nd Lieutenant Ickes, who Corpsman Bilkey gave battlefield aid, was lying gravely wounded on Iwo Jima, President Franklin Roosevelt entered the Oval Office to convene what should have been a routine cabinet meeting. However, it started with, "Harold, I understand that your boy has been hit," to which the grave-faced Secretary Ickes responded in the affirmative as his colleagues looked on. "Do you know how bad it is?" Ickes had no answer. On March 5th, realizing the fatigue and exhaustion of the Marines, the High Command scheduled a day of rest with no attacks or offensive maneuvers planned. Hot meals were served, mail delivered, and the men were told to write home. We have that letter. March 5th, 1945. Dear folks, I have found time to drop you a few lines again. Received some mail from you today and was very glad to hear from you. Everything is going along pretty good. All I can do is trust in God and hope for the best. Also, I received letters from Jane, one from Aunt Laura, and another from Miss Harris today. I'll write you a long letter as soon as this damn thing is over. Love to all, Fritz. 2 parts are interesting. Things are going pretty good, which we now know was not true, and put my trust in God. Others have told us that when they felt they had no more control over their situation or their future, all they could do was put their trust in God.
Dear Mr. and Mrs. Bilkey, information has been received in this bureau that your son, Frederick William Bilkey, pharmacist mate 3rd class, United States Naval Reserve, was wounded in action in the performance of his duty and in the service of his country. Because of the great volume of communications now required for essential fleet operations, the dispatch received was necessarily brief and did not disclose the extent of his injuries. You may be assured that the best medical care is provided for naval personnel. It is hoped that he will communicate with you in the near future, informing you of his welfare. It will not be necessary for you to write to this Bureau for additional information. The Bureau is aware of your anxiety and your desire for further details, and if any additional information is received, it will be promptly forwarded to you. By the direction of the Chief of Naval Personnel, sincerely yours, W.G. McNichol, Jr., Lieutenant, United States Naval Reserve.
I've seen them crawl to help wounded people facing almost certain death. It takes some kind of bravery to go work on a wounded man and knowing that a sniper has just put him down over there and you're going to go back right in that same situation. You're talking about bravery now, that's it.
Headquarters, 3rd Marine Division, in the field. The Commanding General, 3rd Marine Division. Pharmacist Mate, 3rd Class Frederick W. Bilkey, United States Naval Reserve. For meritorious service while serving on Iwo Jima, Volcano Islands on March 14, 1945. On this date, Pharmacist Mate 3rd Class Bilkey, then attached to a Marine Rifle Company, willingly and unhesitatingly, with complete disregard for his personal safety, made his way through intense enemy machine gun fire and rifle fire to the exposed position of a wounded man of another battalion, whose company had been unable to send help. Upon reaching the man, Pharmacist Mate 3rd Class Bilkey discovered that he was dead. While examining the body, he was seriously wounded by the same sniper whose bullet had ended the life of the Marine. Throughout the entire operation, Pharmacist Mate 3rd Class Bilkey had continuously distinguished himself as a medical corpsman of the highest caliber by similar acts of courage and devotion to duty. His conduct throughout was in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. Major General, U.S. Marine Corps, G.B. Erskine, commanding.
"23 doctors and 827 corpsmen were killed on Iwo Jima, and of the 27 medals of honor awarded during the battle, 4 of the recipients were Navy corpsmen.
There's a new flag on Iwo Jima. You can see Old Glory flying there. From the beachhead to the foxhole, through motor-swept ravines, to the heights of Surabaya, crept a handful of Marines. There were brave men who fought and died there. Let's give thanks to them in every prayer. There's a new flag on Iwo Jima. There's a star-spangled banner flying there. There's a new flag on Iwo Jima. You can see Old Glory flying there. From the beaches to the foxhole, to Margaret's West Ravine, to the heights of Surabaya, crept a handful of Marines. There were brave men who fought and died there. Let's give thanks to them in every prayer. There's a new flag on Iwo Jima.
those who fought there, Iwo Jima will be remembered for its 36 days of ferocity and terror. For the rest of us, it is a battle in U.S. history that created character, defied defeat, and turned men into heroes.
Iwo Jima is now American territory, and the fact that the island is ours is proven by the American flag that flies from the Central Airport. The Battle of Iwo is won. I return you to Guam.